Micah Christensen, welcome back to the Undraped Artist Podcast.
Thank you very much. It is thrilled to be here again. I love doing this.
Yeah, I'm glad because we get comments all the time of people who say you're their favorite part of the podcast. So I'm slightly offended by it, but I'm always glad to have you back.
Do me a favor. Call me every morning and tell me that. I have a little bit of imposter syndrome when it comes to how much people care about this stuff. And so it's good to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're a huge asset. So I'm excited to hear about what you're going to tell us about today.
Well, I know your listeners have already heard me talk about Sorolla, and this will be another one of those times, but I've got a specific focus with this. And it has to do with what I've been doing over the past year and what I'm going to be doing for the rest of the year. And that is that it's the 100th anniversary of Sorolla's death this year. And there are about 18 exhibitions that have or will take place by the end of the year to celebrate this centenary. And I've seen all of them. I've been back to Spain 3 times. I'm going back 2 more times by the end of the year to see them. I've taken thousands of photographs. And I think that it's all in preparation of a book that I'm titling Educating Sorolla, about how he attained his arsenal of skills as an artist and developed in his early years. So today I thought that what we would talk about would be what kind of environment was an artist like Sorolla. We're going to use him specifically, but we're also going to talk generally about artists from his era. This is from, the last quarter of the 19th century, 1870s and on, which is the same era that people like Zorn and Sargent and Boldini and a lot of these, if we're talking about American artists, we're talking about Eakins. This is the environment that they're all being educated into. And we're going to use Sorolla as a specific example as to what it was like to grow up at that time, as from his childhood going into school until he has really his first public outing. So there will be a lot of images, and these are almost all taken from images I took at the exhibition Sorolla Orígenes, or Sorolla Origins, at the Museo Sorolla in Madrid. And I think it'll be illuminating, because I think that one of the things we do as people living today, 21st century, is we think, oh, I can never paint like these people because they had a completely different environment and a completely different education than what I had access to. And so I have this conversation with artists. They kind of lose hope when they see the work of some artists. And
is that really what you hear? Do you actually hear that? Because here's what I feel. I would say we have more resources and we just lack, or I personally just lack the genius. That's how I feel. It's like, I almost see them like they were superhuman or something. And even with the internet and YouTube, somehow it seems impossible to achieve that level. So I'm curious if you're actually hearing that from artists, that they're saying, no, we didn't have those schools.
I hear so this is what I hear. I hear something about what you're saying, which is, oh, they're geniuses and I'm not a genius. Right.
Yeah.
And I can't be like them, which I don't think is true, because I don't think that it's genius that makes these people. I think you can teach a lot of these skills. Right. And I think that it's not a matter of, oh, they were a genius and that's that. So no one can ever do that. But I also hear, the world has changed so much, and the way that we educate artists has changed so much that we can never catch up to the amount of time that they had to be educated. We'll revisit that question at the end of the discussion, because I think it's a mixed answer. I don't want people to walk away from this discussion and say, I can do exactly what he did. I don't think we can reproduce circumstances. But I also do think that we can look at what he and his contemporaries experienced and say, you know what? There are things here that are very much like the environment we're living in. And maybe it's not out of our reach. And maybe these are, maybe we're putting them on too high of a pedestal in some ways. And in other ways, maybe we can do our own thing and we can't reproduce that thing that they did.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, let's start with just where Sorolla was as a mature adult, right? This image right here. This is Sorolla, 1890s. He's in his mid 40s when he paints this, and this is the height of his career, and it has almost all the hallmarks of a great Sorolla. It's a multi-figural composition. It kind of breaks the rules of what most academic art would be. Most academic art would say the most important figure in the brightest light and in the foreground of the image, and that there's a clear narrative going on in the image. And this puts the brightest light at the background. It puts all the figures in shadow, and the gestures are all fairly minimal, and he draws your attention around the image, not with the obvious hand gestures, but often with the full bodies of like that boy in the foreground leaning forward, who's looking at the other boy, and then there's the man behind him who's got a kind of, he's leaning, and they're all having lunch in a boat, right? Mm-hmm. It's the kind of subject that if you went to one of his academic teachers, they would have said, you're breaking all the rules here. It's not a very clear image. Why would you want to paint these everyday people anyway, right? And why would you do it in such an obtuse way where all the values are the reverse of what they should be? Why don't you have them in the bright light, Why can't we see their faces clearly? But this is what makes Sorolla great. Takes an everyday subject, does everything in a very observational, subversive way. And makes it, he elevates a humble everyday subject, and it makes you think. It's a huge painting. It's like 8 feet wide.
Wow.
Right? This is an 8-foot wide painting. And you look at it and you think, how quickly did he paint it? And I don't know the answer to that, but he surely didn't do it all in one go, but it gives you the impression of being freshly done in one go almost. Right?
Yeah, it really does. Huge brushstrokes.
That's how he did it. He made everything look that fresh and that well done. But Sorolla went through a lot of steps to become this artist. He had to go through all of the basic academic training of his day, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're not going to talk about this. We're going to talk about the fundamentals that he learned as a young man growing up in the south of Spain, which was far away from the center of the art world of his day. And we're going to talk about the skills that he developed. So
that's exciting.
Go to this first.
Okay.
Let's go. Yeah, I find it very exciting. So this is not by Sorolla.
Oh, I was going to say, are you kidding? That's Sorolla?
No.
Okay.
No, this is by an artist who was one of Sorolla's first teachers. And, we're not going to go into him in a great detail, but this is why I'm bringing up this painting. It's a weird painting to us these days, right? I mean, this is a really weird painting. Sorolla grew up in Valencia, which is in the south of Spain on the coast, and it's a fishing town that historically, going back to even before the Middle Ages, was famous for ceramics and fabrics. So it's got an artisanal tradition. It's got people who are used to making a lot of everyday objects. It's not a big fine art town, even though there were some people. Jose de Rivera, the famous Spanish painter, was from there, but most of his career was in Rome. And when Sorolla was 2 years old, that was 1865, his parents both died of cholera. And he was raised by his maternal aunt and his uncle, who she was married to. And that man was a locksmith who specialized on boat locks. So Sorolla, at the age of as early as 7 and 8 years old, was out working on boats with his uncle, changing locks. But he's also got this, we call it the Vasari legend, because everybody's got this in their story who's an artist of great talent. They say, when he was 8 years old, a piece of charcoal fell from the fireplace. And on the wall or on the floor or on the tabletop, he did a perfect portrait of everyone in the family. And we knew at that moment that he would be a great artist. Well, there's a similar story with Sorolla, that he was just doing portraits of people as a kid, and his aunt and uncle, realizing that he's got a little bit of talent, decide to send him to this school of artisans, it's called, that had just opened up, literally like a year. He was 9 years old when it opened up, when he's showing this interest. And this painting is in the entrance of it. And it's a perfect allegory of what the school was all about. In the center of the painting, you've got this woman who's in armor, and she's Minerva, who's the Greek goddess of the arts. And she is standing in the foreground, lifting up the blindfold of this little orphan boy who's able to see the abundance of the fine arts in front of him that she's showing to him. And in the background of them is a factory or school with smokestacks that's making pottery and fabrics. And then there's the ocean in the background of Valencia. The school was a night school because they knew that children were working. I mean, we're not talking about today's standards, right?
This episode is brought to you in part by Rosemary Brushes. If you're one of my listeners who's a professional artist, you're already using Rosemary Brushes. But for the rest of you, come on. Take your work a little more seriously. Stop buying the other brands. It's just not worth it. Every now and then you may get lucky and buy a good brush from another brand, but use the brand that professionals like myself are using. Go to rosemaryandco.com, link in the description or the show notes, and get yourself some quality brushes before your next painting.
So Sorolla, from the age of 9, is going to school with adults and children, learning how to paint ceramics, paint fabrics or design fabrics, and how to do color photographs. And he's working during the day as a locksmith, and at night, at 9 years old, he's going to this art school. And we've got the very first thing he ever did for it, which is the next image.
That's incredible.
It's
9 years old.
Yeah,
he has a job and going to school.
Yeah, and you know, he's got this little watercolor that he's done with the alpha, with like it's got his letters, and it's got he's you know, it's a form that they've given him, almost like a paint by number, right? Where they say, here's a cartouche in the middle that you're going to fill with some letters, and then here's a little panel at the top that I want to make you to make a whatever scene you want, and he turned it into a seascape with boats. He did this when he was 9 years old.
Yeah, that's incredible.
It's a classroom exercise, and he's we don't know how much of it is copied or made up, but it's a mix of things. He's probably getting a lot of help from his teachers, right?
Yeah.
And there's the teachers there, and this is what's key. The teachers there at this new school for artisans at night are teaching at the artisan school, and during the day are teaching at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts. The adult anatomy classes, the geometry classes, they're teaching fine artists during the day. Okay?
Wow.
So Sorolla has a teacher who immediately takes interest in him and starts giving him harder assignments as a 10-year-old. And that's where the next images were done when he was 10 and 11. Okay, so he's copying this. This is copied from a print that he's got, and he wins an award for doing a copy of the Christ Child Asleep. That was I think this was done originally in the 1800 to 1820 period. It's a neoclassical image. It was a popular print. They're literally taking it out of a book, giving it to their students and saying, copy this, but you have to add the shading and you have to add the body color. So, the white in this is kind of it's what they would have called body color, but it's gouache, right? So he's added in that gouache white into the body. So he's doing this. This is the first real work we have from him as a 10 and 11-year-old.
So
And
tell me more about that. I mean, how much do you think the teacher is aiding him? Is he transferring this from the reference, or is he just copying by eye at 11 years old?
I think we're not seeing a lot of the work that he's doing in the classroom between this and the thing we saw before. I think that he's probably given what a lot of art students are at that young age, and were given in the Middle Ages even, up into this period, which is they're given what's called onion paper, which is basically a transparent paper.
Mm-hmm.
And they're gritting and tracing out things
Okay.
in order to understand proportion. And what we're seeing is probably the culmination of 1 year's work. His one, at the end of the year, they're judged on one major work that they have to do. And he's probably done, 20 or 30 things before he did this that we're not seeing. And this was the thing that he did, which is probably a combination of him transferring some of it and then being given the responsibility to shade it and to put the highlights on it. And he's probably being judged not by the accuracy of copying it, but by his interpretation of shade and highlighting.
Yeah.
That's probably
so he's
what
being
he's
judged
being
on
graded.
modeling form.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
And so he's doing this as a boy, and he's not really inventing it, right?
Yeah.
He's at all. It's entirely him. And if you were to look at the original print, you could see that he's made some things less complicated than other things. He's backed off on the fabric complication. He's backed off on the foliage. And I mean, he's 11.
Yeah.
He's 11 years old. And is it terribly difficult stuff that he's doing? He's got a lot of guidance, and he clearly, his teachers, compared to other classmates that are working at the same time, see that he's got some talent. So they start putting him into some advanced oil painting classes in the school.
Mm-hmm.
And he starts going out on a regular basis with a man named Ignacio Pinazo. And Ignacio Pinazo has trained in Rome, and he's been working with a group of artists that are called they're an Italian group that kind of predate the Impressionists. They're called, why is the name escaping me? It'll come to me while we're talking.
Okay.
But they're going out in the open and they're painting with oil. And so Sorolla, from the age of, it's 1880. So now he's 15 years old. He's doing the next images. 14 and 15 years old.
Wow.
He's going out and he's painting directly in PleinAir. He did this one when he was 1880 to 1882. He's born in 63. He's 16, 17 years old doing this.
Incredible.
And this is what's unique to being Spanish at the time. And also, I don't know if it's unique to being Spanish. This is what's happening on a meta level. So let's back off in what's happening in Europe in general. In the 1860s and 70s, the French decide that the French had previously not had oil painting as part of their curriculum at their school system. You would go to a regional school as a teenager, and you would learn how to draw from casts, and then you'd be partial casts, and then the full classical casts, and then the nude model posed in classical statue positions, all in graphite or charcoal.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would be sorted into a teacher's studio, usually like a Jerome or a Picot or a Duran or somebody like that. No, Duran wasn't really part of the École des Beaux-Arts, or a Léon Bonnat. And you would be gradually introduced to oil painting after graduation, or at the very last stage of graduation from the school. The school was there just to teach you drawing. And even Eng and a lot of these teachers would repeat this phrase of, give me somebody who wants to paint, and I'll teach them to draw, and they will become a painter.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to teach them any painting skills, right? We're going to teach them drawing. Painting is something they have to learn on their own or under the mentorship of a working artist, not from us. This changed in the 1860s and 70s, where all of the schools started to believe in the importance of plein air painting, because they see plein air as a skill in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going, they kind of adopt watercolor at first, but then the schools realize that, we should really be doing oil painting. Part of this is because the technology of oil painting changed. Tubes were introduced. This sounds crazy to artists living today, but it wasn't until the early 19th century that we had the ability to carry around tubed oil paint. It was an English invention. And so you could finally go out with oil without having to regrind or mix it on a regular basis. It could stay in a tube and not dry out. And artists are going out and painting. And in Spain, which is where Sorolla comes in, they had made a rule in the 1860s, and this is so crucial, and this is something we may not be able to reproduce in our day, where they said, any school that teaches history, geography, and language can be counted as a general education school and will receive government funding to educate anyone who qualifies to attend. In other words, you could be a fine art academy and say, add a teacher that taught geography, and math was part of it too, and language and history, and all of a sudden you could have government funding for your art school. Right? So you've got a Royal Academy, and the Royal Academy, they keep pretty strict standards based on talent, and it costs money to go to this school, but they say to Sorolla, after seeing his talent at this artisanal night school that he's going to, they say, look, they say to his aunt and uncle, we'd really like him to come to this school. He's got talent. And they say, we don't have money. And they say, it's no problem. We've got this Antonio Perez, who's a local photographer, and he needs an assistant who can colorize his photos. And this guy was a pioneer in Spanish and European portrait photography. He'll pay for Sorolla to go to school as long as he colorizes photos in his off-school hours.
Wow.
So this man becomes Sorolla's father-in-law. Sorolla marries his daughter. And Sorolla is using photographic equipment the whole time he's going through fine arts school from the age of like 13, 14. He's colorizing photos, taking photos, and he's had his education paid for, and he doesn't have to go to general education school like everybody else. He goes to an art school where he's doing 90% arts education and 10% geography, math, language, and other skills that the school is doing as part of the government program.
Mm-hmm.
So this is him. By the time he's been in the school for a year or two, this is the kind of work he's doing. We can go to another image. You can get an idea of the kind of stuff he's doing in plein air. Sorry, that's an earlier image. Let's skip that one. Keep going.
Okay.
Okay, so this is probably a combination. These two images that you were just showing, these are all done in the same year or two period of him doing a combination of probably plein air and working in the classroom. He's probably you can see that he's got the PleinAir that he's put down first, and with that figure that's on the right, you can see that it's drawn over the top,
Yeah, that's
right?
true. Yeah.
So he's probably adding in that figure later after he's laid down the rest of it by doing it out in the field. So he's getting a very practical education of, let's go out and with your oil kit, let's go out and let's do and these are small paintings. I mean, we're talking like they're probably like 5 inches by 9 or 10 inches. They're not big at all.
Yeah, that's
And he's doing a lot of,
that's small. It makes
yeah.
for tiny little heads.
And you can see that there's not a huge amount of detail in the bodies. A lot of it is just kind of like he's getting down to the figural gesture of what the figure is, the arm raised. There's some proportions that he's got right, some that he's got wrong. He's got the bend in her waist pretty well down at the figure on the right, but the figure on the left, the arm, the length of that upper arm isn't, and the lower arm isn't quite right on her left arm, right? But it's stuff that he's trying to figure out how to put her into the physical space too, right? He's kind of stuck her in a little further back than the other figure, and he's put her in the middle of this gourd patch. And he's just pasted her in essentially, right?
Yeah.
But he's also learning interesting skills. He's learning how to shade her face with her hand raised up, right? And he's got the highlights on her, across her sternum, going to her arm, down the sleeve. He's got where the shadows are. He's not overworking stuff. And this is what Ignacio Pinasso is known for, who is his teacher. He was known for not overworking things. Keep everything brief and use just as little information, as you need to get the information across. Don't overpaint was something that he would often tell his students. So go to the next image, and you'll get a couple more of these ideas of how he would do this. This is, again, a small image. We're talking like an 8x4, 8x5. And he's 16, 15, 16 at this point. What do you see as you're looking at these?
I mean, it's refreshing to see that he's human, because he's clearly, clearly not evolved yet. I mean, they're not bad paintings, but yeah, I mean, it's great to see the humanity in him, frankly.
There's this study that was done. I was reading this recently. I've been kind of obsessed with chess lately. And they showed that chess grandmasters aren't superior to normal people in any particular way. They don't have better reasoning skills. They don't have better mathematical skills. They don't have better skills when it comes to, visually seeing things that we don't see. What they have is they have thousands of more games in their data banks. And so they recognize patterns that they become familiar with and they put into play when they're doing their work as a chess player. And I think that that's what we're seeing here, is that Sorolla had teachers who at the school recognized, and it's part of the environment of working with oils now in the last quarter of the 19th century, of instead of we're going to do careful drawings that lead to one final painting at the end of a month or at the end of a quarter, at the end of a year, and judge you at the end of all those studies leading up to the one work. Instead of that, we're going to have you do dozens and dozens of tiny paintings. That was the curriculum. And the dozens of tiny paintings means that at a young age, he has a comfort level with oil painting that I think the previous generation of artists didn't have, even compared to him, right? Because that curriculum change in the 60s and 70s meant that he was even more familiar with oil painting than many of his teachers were 10 or 15 years later in their career than he was. Because he was working early in oil over and over again.
That grandmaster chess player analogy is spot on. Because yesterday I was painting with this painter who actually had on the podcast, Ellie Wilson. And we
Oh
went up one
yeah.
of the canyons. We did 3 different scenes. And I was really struggling because it was sort of a partly cloudy day. It rained half the day, or at least part of the day. And there were these huge clouds blocking the sun. So we'd have no light and then lots of light and this, that, and the other. And I was amazed how she improvised and was
Hmm.
and what I noticed about her was that she had painted these things before. Maybe not these exact same scenes, but these problems before. And I was as
Yes.
an inexperienced plein air painter, I was sitting there going, now what am I supposed to do? It's a totally different light. I've never done a scene like this before. This is a new experience for me. And it was clear to me that she had solutions already in her, in her bank of information, like collected, and she applied them. I mean, with the last painting she did, she cranked it out in, I don't know, a half an hour while wrangling her toddler who kept on falling out of the van and whatnot. I'm not even kidding. I mean,
Yeah.
she's something else. And but she had done it with the light changing, and you could tell she was just drawing on experience. It was so obvious.
And I think that she would say the same thing about you if she was trying to paint a portrait next to you. You hear this occasionally that art is just problem solving often, right? And how do you solve this problem that's in front of you? And it really is when you're Soroyan, you're looking at the problems he's trying to solve in these early images. It's not a lot about drawing accuracy in what he's doing in these early pieces. He's mostly trying to get value and color, right? He's trying to get these very basic things down. It's not, the French academic teachers would have flipped out seeing these images because they would have said, he's not learning the basis of art, which is drawing, and he doesn't have an accurate outline on these figures. He's just doing vague spots where things are. And the rubric has changed. And I think if you dropped your pin on anywhere in Europe at this time in the 1870s, you would have gotten different emphasis, right? In France, there would have still been a strong emphasis on drawing. In in Italy, there was more of an emphasis on this kind of oil painting because of what had gone on in among the people that Pinasso Soroya's teacher was involved in. In England, they're doing the French model. In the United States, they're doing the French model. In Germany, they've almost not introduced oil at all. So there's no oil, really. You're almost doing entirely work from drawing. You were even going out as a German painter and doing landscapes as careful line drawings.
Hmm.
It's a very different. So it's all over the map. But in Spain, it's oil, 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 oil. Look at the next couple images with me. So if you go to the next one, you can see that it's even more about these very careful color transitions that he's trying to get down and values. So he's got, a little patch of dark in the foreground on the right, but he's kind of got a golden mean going on, right? Where the trunk of that tree is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not halfway. It's about, exactly where that golden mean is. And that's exactly also where that horizon line is. And you can see he's trying to make this painting interesting by using the fence line to lead you back with the highlights along those rails on the fence. It's not a super successful painting. He's you can see that he's reaching, right? He's like, okay, how do I take this subject with all of these greens I'm seeing in the one image and show a differentiation between the greens and the foreground, the background, the middle ground? How do I get that dark forest light? It's not super successful. But then at the same time, in the classroom, he's doing so. This is what he's going out and doing outside in plein air painting, and he's simultaneously doing the next image, the next 2 or 3 images,
Oh wow, that's
which are these
different.
very carefully organized still life paintings with lots of color and very careful drawing. But
Yeah,
the
it's very
drawing
linear.
is done,
Very linear.
yes, but it's done with a brush. It's linear with a brush. You can even see if you're looking at them that he's drawing the lines with the brush on the canvas. And you can see it in the next, and these are small again. They're not monumental pieces.
This is
This
Sorolla?
one's, this is Sorolla. He's, 16, 15, 16, 17 years old doing these pieces.
Wow. That is surprising.
Look at the next one. The next one is
looks
really
like
ambitious.
it looks like 200 years older than Sorolla.
And a lot of that is because he's being given old master stuff to look at.
Yeah.
It's
Wow.
it's kind of, it's as a subject matter, it's kind of boring, right? I mean, it's who would want to own this Sorolla as the Sorolla they owned? Hardly anybody, right? But as a challenge for a young artist, that's a pretty ambitious piece. Holy cow.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, look, he's got, one of my favorite things is look at the carnation on the left and look at on that polished wood surface, how he's got the green reflection and the white reflection that's pooling in there, which is just like, it's so beautifully handled. And he's just a kid, he's like 16, 17 years old. And he's like the brass of that foot that's reflecting in the sharp part of the table. This is a show-off piece. He's really showing how far he's come with his drawing skills, with his coloring skills, with his paint application. I mean, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, there really is. Honestly, if you crop this painting right here, it would actually be quite a beautiful painting.
That's what the next painting is. The next painting, I think, is either a study for it or just another one. I think it is the study.
How funny is that?
And yeah, it's so funny that you'd say that. But he doesn't have the reflection on the surface here. But I think this does show his real confidence with laying down paint and brushwork at this point, right? I mean, he's only like 16 or 17 years old here.
Yeah. Confident for a 16 or 17-year-old, but not confident for his for the 40-year-old Sorolla. No, not at all. You can see the struggle in here.
He is overdoing this compared to what he was doing. I mean, it's really a lot of like fidgeting inside those lines and laying down multiple layers in some areas.
Yeah, I imagine if he had done this pedal down here in his 40s, it would have been 1 or 2 strokes. But he's sort of picking at it, trying to make sense of the shape, but he hasn't got the drawing skills to just hit it in a few strokes like he does 10 or 15 years later.
So before we go to the next image, let me explain what's going on now. So now that he's in his 3rd year at the academy, he's roughly 17 years old. He's able to submit works to a national contest called the National Exhibition, which is the equivalent of the French Salon for Spain. Every country has this at this point, and this is the environment that we've got in America too, by the way, which is you've got all of these regional academies that are working under the curriculum of a national school. The national school for Spain is in Madrid. For France, it's in Paris. For England, it's in London. For Germany, they've got their various schools too. And what you do is if you're from a regional school like Sorolla, you don't know the judges, and you're competing against all the students who have been in Madrid, who the teachers know really well. So you don't want to go on a head-to-head battle with their students doing figurative work or landscape work in your first outing at the national competition. You want to do something that is a little different than what everybody else is, and maybe in a category that doesn't put you up against the heavy hitters. So what he submits when he's 17 years old are 2 marine scenes from the Valencian port. And that's what the next 2 images are.
I've been doing Jeff's online mentorship program for about a year now, and it is awesome. Everything is online, super streamlined. If you can be there, I mean, you have the ability to talk to him once a week and he can review your work and help you. If you can't be there, it's pre-recorded. You can go back and even re-watch things if you missed something during class or couldn't be there. So the online portion of it is almost better than real life because you can always go back to it, which is awesome. The demos are recorded. It's just like all available whenever you need it. And I'm a stay-at-home mom of 4 and my time is limited and it's also very interrupted. And so to be able to go back has been clutch for me. And you get to work with Jeff Hine, who's awesome. He's tough. The assignments are simple, but difficult, and they're difficult to make us all better. And he's able to give us these assignments, coach us through it, help us stay excited to progress. And so it's just been a great experience. I am so grateful that he has been willing to take time away from his own art to offer all of us to have it. So if you're thinking about doing it, it's amazing.
If you're interested in learning more about how you could study with me, either online or in person, check out HeinAtelier.com. That's HeinAtelier.com.
And they're all done. These aren't huge either. These are like 12 by 30, like 14 by 30. And they're competent, and they're not what he's normally doing for his classwork. They're almost entirely, you can tell, his teacher's saying to him, look, you just want to get on the radar of the people in Madrid. You don't, like in the capital. And you don't want to try and do a figurative work because you're not ready to compete with them, and they're not going to take you seriously anyway. You just want to go there, do a work that's good enough to get accepted, maybe not an award, and you want to be able to go there and introduce yourself to all the people who are the judges. So you get to know the lay of the land, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he submits 2 of these seascapes. They get accepted, and he gets mild recognition for them. But what he really does when he's up there is introduce himself as the new kid from the province. It's like, imagine that you're, I don't know what the equivalent would be of it today, but imagine that like New York's got this competition, everybody knows each other in New York, and then some kid shows up from Nebraska who they've never heard of before, and he submitted these 2 works, and they're like, oh yeah, I can tell you're from Valencia because you're doing a seascape, because that's an ocean town, and yeah, these are really good. It's nice to meet you. Good to know you, and can't wait to see what you do next year, kind of thing, right? But while he's there, he has the excuse, because he has the excuse from the school and from his scholarship that's given to him by the photographer to spend a few weeks in Madrid, and he uses that time to copy works by Velázquez in the Prado. And that's what the next images are. They're his works. So this is a small study that he's done of, I've got the full image by Velázquez in the next shot, so you can compare them side by side if you want to.
Oh, you've shown us this one before.
Yeah, so this is the most copied work of Velázquez by artists in the 19th century, and he's copying the most copied moment from the painting. Its painting is called Las Hilanderas, or the Weavers, and Velázquez 250 years before Sorolla is capturing this action of a woman who's making yarn, right? Who's weaving the wool into a ball, and it was seen as Velázquez was seen as someone by the Spaniards. Everybody who's got a school of art has got their pantheon of gods that they're trying to emulate. If you're French, you're looking at this time at David, you're looking at Ingres, you're looking at mostly French artists, with a few classical artists like Poussin. If you're English, you're looking at Joshua Reynolds, you're looking at Anthony van Dyck, that's who you're worshiping. If you're Spanish, everybody's trying to do Velázquez. So what does Sorolla do as an artist from Valencia that has one or two Velázquez's, but nothing major like they do in Madrid? He uses his time to try and copy the big ones. So he does this moment. Then he does, I'll show you there are three more that we can kind of quickly go through just to show that he's doing master copies. So this is a headshot from the Surrender of Breda, which we talked about in another podcast. And you can see an image of it next. The next image is it's just the head, right? But he's trying to get how Velázquez managed that central portion of the focus of the painting. And this is a dirty painting. I was kind of upset when I went to the exhibition that they hadn't had this painting cleaned. So I don't know how good it was how good Sorolla's copy was, because this is a very dirty painting. He wouldn't have painted it that off on its values. It's the same with the next painting, which is he's looking at Mars, the god of war. This is a tiny painting. He did a tiny copy of that piece. That's Velázquez, and that's his copy. Which the hard thing about this painting is getting all of the flesh tones right. Because the Velázquez does this at his most mature, and it's a brilliant study in all of those flesh tones.
Yeah.
And Sorolla is really trying to get all the highlights right, trying to get all the reds right. It's also a dirty painting, so we can't really see how well Sorolla did because it's very dirty. But we can at least see that what he's trying to do when we look at the Velázquez. These are the things that he's trying to get right. There's one more, I think. And these are all small copies. This one's actually a full size. This is a Velázquez painting of Menopus, kind of, a figure that was a Greek writer. And you've got Velázquez's version. This is Sorolla's version. That's Velázquez's version. And this is the only one that Sorolla does full size. I don't know why he chooses that, because of all of them, it's interesting that he would make that one the full size image. But that's what he does. He does a full size of Menopus. But those are four pretty serious attempts, right? He's 17 years old, and he's doing Velázquez copies that are, pretty competent for somebody who's doing his first try at him.
You think he's doing them right out of a museum? I mean, he must be, right?
I know that he is.
Yeah.
I know that he is, because I've actually got the signatures of the days that he went on the Prado's copies book. They've got a copies book. So you can see the day that he's gone and that he's reserved the space to go and copy and study these. And he's not taking a lot of time. He doesn't have a lot of time. So these are things that he starts in Madrid and he finishes in Valencia. But even then, these aren't month-long projects. He's painted these all in days and weeks, right? Wow. They're not huge projects, because he's got to quickly go back and do his final year of paintings. And he does many paintings, which is what we're going to see, the last year of work at the Academy. And his goal is to do a number of works for a school contest. And then on top of that, have a major work that he can send to Madrid. So in 1 year, he does several major works and a few minor works. And we're going to quickly see these. He did these all from the age of 17 to 18. So this is a street scene, tiny, but we see another level of him controlling light and drawing, right?
Yeah, that's much more sophisticated.
Much more. And look at he looks just like his teacher Pinasso here, who's doing these. It's almost like they're Parisian street scenes, but in the south of Spain. That's what they look like. So they're influenced by what's going on in Spain too. And in fact, the artist that he's most obsessed with at the time, from what we understand, is Adolf von Menzel. And Menzel is a German artist who's famous for doing a lot of street scenes. And keep going through a lot of these. You'll see there's just a lot of them. We won't hit them
Oh
all.
man, these are cool.
But you can see he's doing them. These are 1882. He was born in 60. He's 19 years old when he's doing these. 1819.
Man.
The next one, we don't have a year on this, but this is an unfinished work, and you can see what his underpainting looks like as he's doing a multi-figural.
I'm glad to see this because I noticed in this one you can see the drawings of the figures barely around these figures here. And then when you go, which I thought was interesting because that's not how we worked later in life. And then, yeah, and you see it here. You see him kind of figuring out their proportions and their position and stuff. Oh, that's too cool. These figures up here on the balcony. How awesome is that?
Yeah, and you can see that he's doing it fast, right? I mean, he would do this this, he would have to record this in a matter of a couple hours. He would do that, right?
Right.
He would get the basic outlines. And then, people aren't going to stay still for you, but he's sitting in this square. He's probably on one day getting the architectural stuff down. That's the basic architectural. And then he's going in and filling in a bunch of figures. And they would describe these things as a few hour exercise of him doing this and then filling in the rest later. He's kind of, it's this, and he's not doing it as a drawing exercise, right? Which is the way the French would have done it. He's already got, at this point, 4 or 5 years of oil painting, plein air oil painting under his belt. Right?
Yeah.
And he's also simultaneously taking drawing lessons. So he's drawing in oil, the figures, he's doing plein air painting skills, and he's forced to work fast. Now I'm going to use a quote from Van Gogh, because we've got a quote from Van Gogh, even though I know that they're nothing alike, so people please forgive me. But Van Gogh used to say, I can paint fast and heavy, I can't go slow and light. I think you could say the same thing with Sorolla in his age. He was not trained to paint slow. He could go fast. He was not trained to paint slowly. It was everything quickly, everything captured on a fly and quickly.
Man, that's interesting. So another thing I want to point out is as he's using perspective drawing skills as well. You can see how he's got lines ruled to vanishing points through here.
Yes.
Yes. But he's also got multiple vanishing points. And yeah, and that's interesting because, you had mentioned before we started recording that you're a fan of James Gurney, and I just interviewed James Gurney. And he had talked about how these old buildings, these old cities, they're often not constructed parallel to one another.
It's true.
Yeah. And so you're going to have all these varying vanishing points. And yeah, you see that with his. I mean, from balcony to balcony, they have 3 different vanishing points, and he's clearly looking for those. So he's doing a lot of stuff.
Boy, that's a good observation. I never would have picked that up. That's a great observation from you and James. That's great. One thing we haven't seen at this point is we haven't seen him do single monumental figures, which he starts doing at the end of his education. He's done a lot of nude studies, which I haven't shown you because we just don't have time for all these, right? But this is the point where he starts doing, his last year, a lot of large figure studies or figure paintings. And this piece is not huge, but it's like 4 feet tall, right? And it's a complicated scene. He's got still life elements. He's got, the figure itself sitting in physical space. He's got a lot of confidence with the fluidity of paint in some places. It's a little fidgety and wonky in some areas, but he gets away with it, right? He gets away with a lot in this.
It's pretty sophisticated in some areas. I mean, the way he simplified the fabric, this white fabric around his legs, and also this shawl, it's just, it's pretty brilliantly simplified.
He also, look at the bottom of that foot, look at the way that he's handled. He's looking at an artist named Mariano Fortuny, who's kind of famous at this point. And he's kind of showing his teachers that he can do Fortuny-esque stuff. He's also looking at an artist named Meissonier. If you look at the next image, there's a little bit of Meissonier in that. And boy, this is an ambitious piece for, I mean, look at how, if the other one was a little fluid in the way that the oil paint was, and the simplification of how those fabrics went up and down. Look at how many different kinds of reds he's got here, and how he's got the little wrinkles in the sock on the guy's right leg, right? And just the holding of whatever he's holding on his table, and the guy's gesture in the background. This is the kind of thing that was very sophisticated. Even the French would have looked at this and said, okay, he's on par with the drawing skills of our students in their final years. So it's not like he's neglected these other skill sets. I don't understand, and this is one reason why I'm doing this study on educating Sorolla, is I don't quite understand how the Spanish get some of the same results or similar results as the French do, even though they're not focusing on drawing skills with the same level of ardor, the same zeal. Because it seems like Sorolla does have a lot of the same drawing skills. Maybe not, I mean, I clearly don't see the same things that a 19th century French academic teacher would see. I'm sure that they would criticize Sorolla, but he's still in the ballpark.
I don't know. By the time Sorolla is mature, he's a better draftsman. I mean, in my personal opinion, it's just one guy's opinion. It's harder to paint loose and quick and bold, and it's harder to draw loose and quick and bold than it is to do a precise linear drawing and then fill it in with color. Because you've got to get it right, nail it, and have one stroke do multiple things instead of just kind of, you know, it'd almost be like, this is probably a stupid analogy, but it would be like building a house by just throwing the concrete, wood, and sheetrock all into a pile and having it land in the shape of a house, as opposed to slowly building the foundation and then slowly putting up the framing and then slowly doing the sheetrock. It's like what he's doing. He's just throwing it all down at one time, and it's a figure, and it's accurate, and it's right.
That's a really good insight. And I think that, and what I'm about to say, I think we can take with a grain of salt too. He says that after this period, which we're not going to talk about the period after this period, but we will at another occasion, potentially. He says, you know, after I graduate, and then he goes to Rome because he wins an award and he's able to go study at the national school in Rome. He starts working with a guy named Pradilla. We talked about Pradilla at another occasion. And he says, Pradilla really made my drawing what it should be. I think that everybody's insecure about their skills, you know. And so I don't think it means to say that his drawing at this stage was crap, but he is insecure at this age about his drawing. He's only, 18 years old right now.
So it says 83. Wasn't he born in 63?
Oh, he's 20. He's 20. You're right.
Yeah.
He's 20 years. You're right. He's 20 years old. So, by the way, this year, go to the next image, is the year of a competition. It is his final year competition. And this is what the competition looks like.
Wow.
They've got this hall, and they've got all the statues lined up on one big long table, and they've got all the paintings on either side. And you can see that roof above them is one that's their classroom at the school, where they can let in more light if they want to. That's fabric at the top. So this is where his classroom is, and it's where the competition takes place. And we're going to see the 4 paintings that he submits to the contest. And the last painting is the one that he went out of the 4 is the one that he wins the top award for his graduating year for. So next image is, these are the 4 that he submits at the end of the year.
And he submitted them all at the same time.
Uh-huh. And that's the one he wins the award for as this best painting.
That's the one, huh?
Yeah, which kind of surprises me, because I think the boy with his outstretched arm is my favorite.
I agree. That's my favorite too. But if I were to pick a portrait, I would have picked the first one. I
Yeah.
like this one better. Yeah, you know, that's contest for you. You know,
That's
it's somewhat
contest.
subjective.
But this is what he submits to show that he has all the skills he needs
Hmm.
to graduate from school. So he's got portraiture. You can see that he's got some of the props in that second painting. He's got some of the flowers, and I think some of the props from his still life.
Yeah.
You know, he's just showing his whole arsenal here, and they're all fairly large. They're all about 4 feet by 2 feet. They're not life size,
Yeah,
but they're not.
these two are far more difficult too. It's so interesting. Contests are strange. I
They are
mean, these
strange,
two
aren't
middle
they?
figure ones are so much more complex.
Yeah, they are. But you know what? If I had asked you if Sorolla had done these don't look like Sorolla to you or
No, they
me, do
still
they?
don't look like Sorolla, but
And that goes to show that he has to jump through the hoops of an academy, right? He has to do what the teachers want. He's not painting what he wants. He's painting things in order to tick boxes to get approval of what he needs. And it was a foregone conclusion that he was going to win. And he also, at the same time he's painting these 4 pieces, he's preparing a monumental, like 6-foot by 12-foot painting to go to the national exhibition in Madrid. And that is the next painting that is the thing that takes up his whole year to paint. This piece you would have never guessed is by Sorolla. Never.
no, no. Holy cow.
So
And he's
you gotta remember
21.
that he's 21.
Oh, freaking, I hate
So
this guy.
he's 21. This painting is roughly, I think, 8 by 12 feet wide. And he's the subject is the defense of Rome when the French invade in the 2nd of May. Remember that famous painting by Goya of the 3rd of May where those people are being shot
Yes.
in a lineup?
Yeah.
So the 2nd of May, which Goya also did a painting of that, is the day before those men are executed when the Spanish make their last stand at the gates against the French and they lose. And you got to remember that Sorolla is living at a time when there is hardly any private market for art in Spain. The biggest market for art is the government, and the government is commissioning huge history paintings that are celebrating national moments of pride for their buildings.
Mm-hmm.
So Sorolla is trying to get a big payday here by painting the defense of Madrid, not a Valencian subject. It's a Madrid subject where the contest is taking place. So he's deliberately painting a subject to try and show the judges that he's not just a regional painter, right? He understands what's important to Madrileños, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're these he understands, and he's got the uniforms down. He's got this very dramatic historical scene in large scale. Now, what they did at this show, which was wonderful, is they showed a lot of his studies. And that's what you're going to see next. First, you're going to see his small final study, which is tiny. No, sorry. This is just some of his ink studies that he's trying to get uniforms down, which
Wait
is
a
a
minute.
little perplexing.
What the heck? Yeah, that is
So out
perplexing.
of context. I have no idea what to make of this.
I don't
Because
either.
they showed out of context. I think he's just trying to get little things down, like what does a foot look like that's being lifted up off the ground? What does it look like when a uniform is being, the bicep area is being scrunched up, and it's just little things. What's more helpful are the things you're about to see, which is go to the next image.
Can I comment here? I think I almost wonder. I don't know. I'm not sure of this by any stretch, but to me, it looks like he's trying to just understand the costume.
Yeah.
Details of costume, like what this embroidery looks like, what this cuff looks like, what the details of this hat are, and like getting historical accuracy in the costume.
Yeah.
But
It's
I don't know.
It's not. I think he would be embarrassed if somebody said, "Oh, this is what Sorolla looks like when he's drawing." This is something he was proud of. So this is one of the faces in it. He's trying to
Is
get
it
the
actually in
emotion
there?
down.
Let's see if we can find it. Do you see it?
No, I don't see it.
Maybe it didn't make the cut.
Maybe it didn't.
Huh. It could be this guy in reverse, but let's see.
Oh, you know
No.
what? This is for another painting I'm going to show you.
Oh,
He
it
did
is.
it about the same
Okay.
time. Keep going.
Okay.
Keep going. Keep going. This is a boy in the foreground who was killed.
This is study for that painting
No,
too?
they say it is. I'm not sure it is, but they put it in the same grouping. The
What an
boy on the
interesting
ground
study.
is, but I think that, and then this is the final oil study that he did for the painting.
About how big was this?
That is roughly 20 by 30, I think.
Now, why was he doing oil studies? Velasquez wouldn't have done an oil study. He would have just gone right into the painting.
This is also just, I think he had to, I think this is where French mode comes in. This is where French mode comes in for these artists. French mode was, okay, guys, let's do a line drawing. Then let's do individual studies of each element of the painting in pencil. Then let's do a final line drawing of the whole painting. Then let's do a color study of the whole painting. And then we'll do the full painting. I don't think he did all of those steps the way a Frenchman would, but he did some of them. Right?
Well, what was the destination of this painting again?
It was the national exhibition, which is the equivalent of the Salon in Spain.
So there was no
So he's
patron.
going to go.
There was no patron. He was just trying to impress.
He was trying to impress and hoping
Huh.
that the state would buy the painting in the end.
Well, because
Right?
my thought was maybe this was for the patron, but that wouldn't be the case.
No, I think he's doing it because he just wants to make sure it's, there's a lot at stake here. This is the launching of his career. He probably wants to show that that he's done all his work, right?
Do we have
That's what he
a
wants to show.
drawing? Because there's a grid in here. I see a grid, and I wonder if there's a preliminary
But
drawing.
They didn't have one. Look at the next two pieces. The next two pieces you see, these are life-size oil paintings.
Life size is in
Life-size.
the size of the painting or of life-size figures?
Life-size figures.
Wow.
Life-size figures. And so these are all that they had up in the show. So I'm showing you all that they had, but I'm sure that he's doing all of these. He's 20, 21, right? And no, he's 19, 20, he's 20 years old. And he's doing them all in preparation for the painting. So he's doing, instead of the French, if we just took what's here, we would say, okay, he's clearly breaking down each element of this painting like a French academic artist would, but he's doing it more in oil than they would have. He's doing it almost exclusively in oil. We don't have all the drawings. Maybe he's doing drawings too. But to me, these oil studies that are life-size are better than the final painting. They almost always are.
They
right?
are really cool.
They're really good. They're really good.
Oh, well, I jumped
then-
ahead. Or are we?
Yeah,
do you
go
want to
back,
stay
go
here?
back.
Okay.
That's the last image. We'll go back. Let's go back. So go back to the finished painting again. Not that one. Not that one.
Okay.
Okay. You can see almost to its detriment. And later he says in his life, he says it a few years later, that this was a period of his life where he was just trying to make it in Madrid, make it nationally, but he wasn't being true to himself. I think I take that with a grain of salt because you know what? When artists say that, or when I read that as an art historian, I think, who cares if you were true to yourself at this point? It's not your job to be true to yourself at this point. Right?
You're trying to figure out who you are.
It's not your job. Your job is to show your competitors, your rivals, and your teachers that you have the skill set, right? So you're pulling out everything you possibly can to make this work, right? And later you're going to figure out, after you've established to the other monkeys in the zoo that you can do what they can do and better than they can do it, or just as well, then you can figure out who you are. This stage is all about what we all go through, you know? We just have, like, my kid just went off to college. My eldest just went off to college. That's where I am in life.
Mm-hmm.
He's not at the stage. I don't care who he is at the moment, right? I care that he can get to class on time, turn in assignments, right?
Right.
And perform at just the level and excel within the system, right? It's not his job to have an individual voice that is unique to everybody else at that moment. To me, what Sorolla is in, and one of the things, like, to me, the part of this, this discussion about his origins and his education is, what skills did he have to absorb and demonstrate as part of the system he grew up in? What did that force him to learn? Right?
Mm-hmm.
He can decide what he's going to do with those skills later in life. But the interesting thing that's the question before us, you and me, Jeff, right now, right, talking about artists and educating artists, is, what do we require of artists and what do we demand of them up to a certain age before we say you've got the skill set you needed to now go off on your own and explore what you want to do? Sorolla has got in front of us a monumental, multi-figural painting. It's got a lot of complication to it. It's not a super exciting painting from our perspective. It's not as interesting as the boat painting that we started off with. It's not as complicated. It's more complicated than that boat painting, but not in good ways, right?
Yeah.
It's got all these figures. It's got all these gestures with hands. It's got all this smoke. It's not, I don't like this painting very much, but as a demonstration of his arsenal, it's impressive.
It's very impressive.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, he's managed to put all these figures, a lot of figures, in the same space, not to mention architectural elements, the cannons included. I would include those as architectural elements. All convincing perspective. They all work with one another. And not only that, but one of the hardest things about multi-figure painting, I find, aside from what I've already said, that's also one of the hardest things, but is just being a director. And at 20 years old, he's already quite the director. I mean, he's got...
Oh, that's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah.
It's hard to do that. It's because it's hard enough just to be a good painter. And then, but to be a multi-figure painter, to be a good one, you also have to be a good director. And you have to tell a story with a snapshot and make sure that every character in the story, characters even being still life and architectural elements, every character in that story serves the narrative. And it's really easy to just paint an impressive wheel or cannon or figure and think that that's going to carry the painting, but it doesn't if it doesn't help the narrative or the composition, right? So man, for 20 years old, for 100 years old, it's pretty impressive.
I want to show you something in contrast that kind of blows my mind and it tells you a lot about Sorolla's skill set. Go to that last painting.
Okay.
So Sorolla wins an award at the contest in Madrid, and he wins the right to go study. I'll go to the one right before that. There we are. He wins the right to go to the school in Rome, which is the equivalent of going to graduate school. He's one of just a couple artists who win the right to go that year. So mission accomplished, right? That big painting of the defense of Madrid, the people in Madrid recognize it, and they say, great, you are just as good as any of the best students in Spain, and we're going to send you to our National Academy in Rome, where you're going to be studying for the next 3 years. But now you have to go back to Valencia because this is how the rules worked. And you have to get local funding from the local government as a Valencian because Madrid's not going to pay for it. Valencia has to paint for its own artists to go. And the school in Valencia says to him, okay, and they gather together. You're going to love this as an artist. Everybody who's listening to this, who's ever done a commission for like a committee is going to love this. They say, okay, if we're going to pay for you to go from Valencia to Rome and to be on scholarship, then you have to paint a painting for us in Valencia that we can hang in our city hall that demonstrates to us that you have the skills. So he paints this painting called The Cry of the Pailleter, the newspaper man. And it's declaring that this newspaper guy, who's the tallest one in the far right,
The one with the flag?
that he is he's making the news that Napoleon and his army have invaded Spain. It's also a history painting from 100 years, 75 years earlier in the history of Valencia. And it's a moment of pride in Valencia that everybody talked about, how their grandfather was there when the newspaper man in the town square announced that Napoleon had invaded. And Sorolla only has 3 months to do the painting, and it's huge. It's also as big as the other painting. And he gets all of the family members and the children of the councilmen on the committee to pose in the painting. And he makes sure that he gets everybody's portrait in it so that they can say when they look at it and they're judging whether or not he did it right, hey, that's my son. Hey, that's my granddaughter. Hey, that's me. So he plays the game,
smart.
and that's why
Yeah.
it's a mess of a painting, because in the painting, not only does he only have 3 months to do it, but he's got to get every face of every council person's relative in there who's helping make the decision as to whether or not he gets a scholarship. But look, this shows you what somebody under those demands in a period of 3 months can do in an 8 by 10 foot painting. 3 months,
that's incredible.
8 by 10 feet. He's got maybe 40 portraits, 30 portraits that he's done in there. And he's got to make it work, even though it's messy, and he's got to get all those portraits in. The other one, he can at least focus on only 5 real figures and then make the others kind of vague. In this one, he's got to get everybody in it.
Yeah, that's wild. But look, it's interesting to look how loose it is. And like, take this guy in the front. There's almost no paint on there.
Go to the next image and you can see a more up close image of it. That's not really up close, but it gives you a little better idea.
Yeah, look how
And you can
transparent
see-
that is. It's just underpainting.
Mm-hmm.
He's just
You can
throwing
totally
it
see
down.
Yeah, he's going fast. So this, but if you compared it to that unfinished market scene that you and I saw with the multiple perspectives
Yeah.
and the very quick drawing, you can see how those skills have transferred, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Those skills of doing, look at just how he does highlights. If you just followed the bright lead white throughout this thing, it's almost like those are in lines going across in areas, swirling through it. If you zoom out and you kind of fuzz your eyes out a little bit,
Yeah.
you can see, go back one painting, you can see how he's controlling the values and trying to get your focus towards that guy in the back. But it's a hard thing to do, but his skills have led up to doing large, fast, multi-figural work at this point. And to me, this painting is a more interesting study of what his skill set is, not because it's good again, right? Because he wouldn't look back and say, that's really good. But it's almost like you say to a chef, okay, you've been to the Cordon Bleu, and we've got 40 people coming for dinner, and these are the only ingredients you have. You have one day to do it, to cook a meal in. Do your best. And then you see what he can do with a limited amount of ingredients and time, and how well he can work under pressure, right?
Yeah.
And that's where his skill set shows up.
Do you think that the pressure, I mean, I'm assuming there was a deadline of 3 months. It's just, he didn't just finish in 3 months. He probably had a deadline, or is that?
It was a deadline. Yeah, he
Okay.
had a deadline that had to be finished. And they're seeing it come together because they know that all their relatives are posing for it and they're posing for it too.
But do you
Right?
think
So they're
doing something like this, it's so ambitious this early in his career, helped to sort of solidify his approach to painting? Because he's forced to paint quickly in this painting in a way that he hadn't been in, or he hadn't in the other multi-figure painting we looked at. And there's a lot of awesome things that are happening because of it. I just wonder, I wonder if
I think
circumstance
that's
sort of steered him into his, his future self.
he has a quote that so when he's I think 60 years old. No, he's about 50. He gets inducted into the academy. And when you're inducted into the academy in Madrid or anywhere, this is practiced throughout Europe, you're given the opportunity to share your philosophy as an artist. And he starts off by saying, and I'm gonna paraphrase it here as I'm translating it. He says that grammar shouldn't be taught to young artists and rules because you extinguish their creative flame. You shouldn't teach them rules and grammar as a kid.
Hmm.
And he essentially goes on to say, my education was misguided because they taught me too many rules and I had to unlearn a bunch of things. And I kind of want to strangle him when I hear that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because I look at his generation. This is one of my theories, and this is a very controversial thing for me to say. We're starting to see in his generation the rise of the belief that you're a creative genius, that you're born with a set of skills, that you don't earn those skills. And I think that Sorolla was a mix of the two. I think he truly believed that he had worked very hard his whole life to develop his skill set. But I think there was part of him that believed that he had a kind of genius. And I think there's some truth to that. But there's part of me that wants to say, listen, Sorolla, you had a very intense art education as a kid that forced you
From
to
9
learn
years
those
old.
grandmaster chess skills. You had to learn from a very young age how to paint oils, how to paint fast, how to do drawing skills with oil, how to do multifigural skills. You were not exceptional in many ways as somebody who was doing oils as a 14 and 15-year-old who'd been painting for 4 or 5 years in oils. You weren't exceptional. You were good, but there's clearly a progression of your skill set over time of you getting better and better and better as you're solving those problems. It's not because you woke up one day and said, you know what? I guess, I feel a tingle in my fingers because God gave it to me. You know what I mean? Didn't happen that way. So he's a puzzle, and so is his generation. I think that Sorolla, Zorn, Boldini, a lot of these artists were living at a time where what was unique to their time was the ability to paint in oils cheaply from a young age over and over and over again from a very young age, which was not encouraged in earlier generations. Earlier generations were not allowed to paint in oil until their very late teens or early 20s.
Hmm.
And they were just taught drawing, right? And so we look at these guys and say, oh, how did they learn how to paint with oil? They came out of nowhere. No. They'd been painting for 10 or 15 years as teenagers in oil. Over and over again. Over and over and over and over again in oil. They're solving problems with that. Were they also part of a huge population of artists who were painting at the time, and there was a lot of money going into arts education because this was pre-film, pre-movie, pre-CGI, pre all this other stuff, and so you had, Sorolla was one of 20,000 artists in Spain, and he was one of 100 who really hit the top rung. Yeah. It's true that the funnel was full of more talent and there was more money in it. That's true, right? That's true. But if these are the things that I, as an historian, am trying to figure out when I see an artist and when I talk to contemporary artists and they say, I could never paint like Sorolla. And my reaction is, the brain is pretty plastic up until its 50s and 60s, more plastic than we thought. You can learn a lot in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. You don't have to say, I can never learn a language or I can never learn how to do these things. No, you can do it, Keep healthy and keep working at it. Just do a lot of it. Do a lot of it, right? A lot.
Hey, I got it. Let me show you something real quick. Okay. This whole episode's got me really thinking about something. I want to show you something, get your thoughts on it. Okay. So I had a girl start studying with me when she was 13. Her name was Juliana Paler. Okay. She goes by Juju. So by the time she was 18, she was doing this.
Wow.
So in 5 years, she did that. Let me switch screens here.
Wow.
So I guess the reason I point that out is because is she very talented? Does she have an aptitude for it? Absolutely. But, she wasn't doing that at 13, but 5 years of full-time study, she actually homeschooled in order to do it full-time, was, that makes a huge difference. And especially at such a young age, to start that young and have that and be so dedicated to it. But I imagine her in 10 years going back and saying, my education, geez, it all those rules just ruined me. I wish I should have just been able to be creative from day one. And it's like, no, I can't get in Sorolla's head. So I didn't live at his time, but I'm kind of with you that that's a little frustrating to me too, because I've even been there personally where I forget how bad I was, and how much I needed to be trained, how much I needed just some good academic rules and principles just to get me over that hump so that then I could be creative. And, I was talking to my daughter recently, Addie, because she's studying with me now. She's also very talented. And she's worried she's not creative because all she's doing is studies and after study after study. And she's like, but I don't know if I'm even a creative person. And I told her, I said, Addie, I'm 48 years old and I'm telling you, you can't really know your creative potential until you have enough information. Imagine if you were floating in space and I said to you, okay, I want you to design a carburetor. And you're floating in space. You don't even know what metal is. You don't know what certain gases are. You don't know what fire is. You don't know what air pressure is. You don't even know, you know nothing. How the heck are you going to design a carburetor? You couldn't possibly even think of it. Right?
Yeah.
So without this foundation, there is nothing to base your creativity on.
No, there's nothing. It's so, and that's part of what's maddening to me about the Sorolla comment. But if I had to be fair to why he said it, he's now in Madrid and he's now proved everybody who, there's a period a little after this where he kind of gets rejected by the people in Madrid. And then he gets an amazing career in France, and Monet calls him the greatest living painter of light. And then all of a sudden the people in Madrid want him again. And when he has an opportunity to kind of rub it in their faces, he says, look, you guys didn't teach me anything, right? I learned, I am who I am. I can see why he said it from that perspective.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a quote by Whistler that comes to my mind where he said, when the muses come or when inspiration comes, they'll find me working at my easel. I think that the older you get, you realize that creativity, inspiration are not as important as a work ethic and a skill set that's developed over time, and that you look at it's one of the things as an art historian when I talk with a lot of my colleagues who are also PhDs who are obsessed with personality cults of artists who write manifestos in the modernist era. And you say, okay, well, so what would have happened if everyone who was a musician decided in the 1920s to 30s to 40s to abandon scales and instruments that had developed over centuries, and you just handed them a saxophone when they showed up to school and said, play this however you want. It's legitimate no matter what you do. You know, whatever sound comes out of that, as long as it's personal to you, that's what matters. But none of them could read music. None of them could play along with others in an orchestra because none of them had learned any of those skill sets, right?
Yeah.
Sorolla and his generation grew up working with a very disciplined approach to the tools that they had with them. Like you're saying, he as a 9-year-old went to night school and was told, hey, by the end of your education, you're going to learn how to do plates and fabric and color photographs. And then one of the teachers said, no. I'm going to teach you how to do oil paintings, right? That are going to go into our local municipality building, or maybe even the Capitol building or the Senate. And I'm going to teach you how to do that. But you're going to have to learn, I mean, they're large multifigural paintings, and you're going to have to learn how to paint like the old masters, like Velázquez did. And we're going to teach you how to paint with oils and how to do still life and how to do multifigural work. And then you're going to, you know, over a period of 6 or 7 years, you're going to figure out how to, after you've done thousands of paintings, maybe you'll get there, right? And then Sorolla, 20 years later, says, we shouldn't teach kids any of those skills because it suffocates their creativity.
Just let their genius show up. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the contradiction of the era. We sometimes blame the modernists for the end of the academic tradition in art and say, oh, it was the modernists, it was Picasso, it was Mondrian, it was the Impressionists, whoever it was that destroyed that academic tradition. An alternative way of saying it is maybe it was Sorolla and his academically trained artists who said, you can't learn what I do. I'm a genius. I'm not going to teach these same skills with the same rigorous level because they can't be taught, because you either have it or you don't. You know? And it's not entirely true. That's an exaggeration. But as an historian, I think of things in these questions of, you know, what, as an artist today showed up to me and said, I want to paint like Sorolla, what would I say? I'd say, well, you know, you can kind of, you know, you could do a lot of what he did. You're not going to have the benefit of skipping out on elementary, junior high, and high school that he did.
Yeah.
To work on art full time. Maybe you'll be 10 years later than he is, but you also didn't have, like, you weren't orphaned, and the school system wasn't as great as we make it out to be in the 19th century for art. It wasn't. We have a lot more tools, like you say, right?
Yeah, we got
he
the
had
internet.
Photography he could work with, but we've got like all of the history of art. He had to travel to Madrid to copy Velázquez, right? You know, we've got every artist that we can pull up, that we can go see, and we can learn. We know chemically how they did things. We know they had all kinds of fallacious ideas about how art was made that was actually wrong, that we found out later. He didn't know exactly how Velázquez made his work. We know how he did his things now. We don't have to guess. We have some advantages to Sorolla. The one thing I would tell an artist is paint. Just paint as much as you can, right? And that's not going to get you there alone. You've got to have good models. You've got to have good critique. And we know this. We know studying any expertise that you have to have an environment where you're looking at good models, you get good feedback, you have good competition to get you through these things, right? In order to improve gradually that skill set. But what we can learn that started this conversation out is that he's not a lone genius who appeared out of the head of Zeus and started painting out of nowhere the way that he painted. He gradually improved to become Sorolla.
Mm-hmm.
Gradually improved to get there. Doesn't mean he wasn't gifted. He was very gifted. But he worked his pants off too.
Yeah.
Did not appear out of nowhere.
Yeah, I don't believe anyone could be Sorolla, but I also don't believe Sorolla could have been Sorolla without his education.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Micah, that was brilliant. That was a great episode.
Fun, isn't it?
Heck
Isn't
yeah,
it
man.
fun talking about this?
Yeah, it really is. And it's really hopeful to look deep into an artist's life like that and see, because I even tell my students, burn your old work, hide it. You don't want people to see the garbage. You want to put your best foot forward. And I think that has been a practice, maybe not literally burning work, but hiding early work for artists for centuries. And so it's part of what contributes to this almost godlike impression that we have of all these great masters, because they've hidden their humanity away. They've hidden their weaknesses away. But it's great that you brought this to us just so we can see that even though, while yes, there's no question he was better than average and more gifted than average person, it is hopeful that he did have to start doing some pretty lousy paintings.
Yeah.
Like we all do. That's inspiring. So thank you for bringing that to our audience, Micah. It was great. It was great talking to you again.
Always great talking to you, Jeff.
Thanks for tuning in to the Undraped Artist Podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe. And if you could, leave a comment or review. That really helps the channel. Please share the show with your friends, and if you're feeling generous, consider a monthly donation at theundrapedartist.com. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.